David Stokes is joining us from the Show Me Institute. He's a policy analyst. Good morning, David Stokes.
Good morning, McGraw. Good morning, Kelly.
Hello, David.
On Friday's show, Scott Sherman and I got into a really interesting conversation about these small municipalities in the St. Louis, North County region, for lack of a better, sort of that's the majority of them. And Scott Sherman's been on this sort of, I don't want to call it a crusade, but has been sort of pointing out the last couple of weeks and months that these small police departments aren't the problem. It's these small little court systems where you've got 600 people in a town. You have a mayor, and you have a police chief, and you have a city administrator, and they're writing thousands of tickets, and 600 people live in these towns. And we got into this conversation. You were listening to the conversation, and you wanted to throw your own 2 cents in.
Well, it's such an interesting discussion, and I'm glad we're having it. It's a few weeks ago when we were talking, we talked about, at sort of more the height of the Ferguson unrest, we were talking about when outsiders might come in here and get key things wrong, like from the national news organizations or whatever.
Right.
Well, here's the sort of the counter to that. Sometimes it takes an outsider to come in and point out something that's really messed up, and maybe everybody who's been around here for a while just accepts it as it is, such as the way these municipalities in St. Louis County exist on court fines so substantially. So I loved the article in the Washington Post by Radley, I think it was by Radley Balco.
Right.
It talked about how these municipalities profit from poverty, as he called it. And there's been some other stories on it as well, and we've got a post up on showmedaily.org. We have a law in Missouri, it's called the Max Creek Law, that limits how much any one municipality can earn from fines and forfeitures.
And what is that?
That Max Creek was a city in the Lake of the Ozark region that was getting about 80 to 90% of its city funds from tickets on a state highway.
Right. And then that has been reduced to what?
Well, it's been reduced to zero because Max Creek disincorporated when they could no longer fund through parking tickets. They're not parking tickets, traffic tickets.
Right.
The city went away.
Right. But what does the law say now? What's the threshold? Isn't it like 30 or 40%?
I think it's even higher than that.
Okay.
And I forget the exact number, but it's in that 50% range.
Right.
And it's several other problems with it. It's targeted towards state highways. The state legislature didn't feel comfortable attaching it to all roads, including local roads, so they focused it on state highways.
Right.
The final problem is it's just not very well enforced anyway. It was enforced in Max Creek, which was the target of it.
Right.
But it needs to be tightened, and that's sort of the solution. We can set a limit in the state legislature of a much more reasonable 10 to 15% and enforce it, and you can address this problem. And it is a real problem, the way too many people, particularly poor people, are abused by this municipal court system.
There is no question. You want to talk about racially, whatever. But one of the things that comes out of this Michael Brown shooting and is this sort of focus on, all right, let's take a look at these courts. And Scott Sherman's point is these towns that have 600, 700 people, and their town literally consists of 0.7 of a mile on a street, writes 3,000 tickets, and so it's basically just it's a mafia deal. You got to pay the man, and so what do when you don't have $75 to pay the attorney to go get your $100 speeding ticket reduced to $300 for some type of excessive noise violation? All of a sudden, that starts racking it up. Mm-hmm. But the other side of that is, who's doing it? It's the town you're living in, right? So you and I drive through Bell Ridge, or whatever else, going to and from wherever else. We get a ticket, we bite the bullet, we pay it. We have the money. What do you do if you're struggling? You got 3 jobs, you got a car that's, got some exhaust fumes because you have to either pay the rent or pay to fix the car, and you pay the rent, and all of a sudden now you're on this sort of never-ending loop. You can't get out of it.
Well, that's why I hope we can address it, and I hope we can address it via A, tightening up the Max Creek Law, and B, the people who live in this community do what they did in St. George, which is disincorporate their community. So we say it's a North County thing, and there's no doubt that many of the worst abusers are in North County.
Right.
But the worst abuser of all a couple of years ago was a little town in South County, St. George. Finally, the residents got sick of it, so they disincorporated. And you saw some people try to do that in Uplands Park last year, and they just failed by a whisker. 57% voted to disincorporate, but you need to hit a 60% threshold. So we need not only does the state have a responsibility to lower the Max Creek's limit, the limit on how much you can collect from fines and forfeiture.
Right. But
And
I don't
enforce
know.
it. But people have to disincorporate or demand change within their own cities too.
Right, but I don't understand. It's more than just the town, because if I'm driving through a community and it's a tenth of a mile on a street and I get pulled over and they have excessive tickets, then you know what? I'm sort of being held hostage. So it's a bigger issue than just the town ready and able to decide to disband. It's a county-wide problem. It's a statewide problem, because that's affecting more people than just who live in that town.
Absolutely. But if you lowered that Max Creek threshold to something, say 10, 15%, you'll remove the incentive for these cities to sit there and ticket people all the time.
Right.
Because how that threshold works is that once a city hits that 10 to 15%, they can still write the ticket.
Right.
They can still enforce public safety, but they don't get any money from it. It goes to the
What
schools
about-
or the state or whomever.
What
Once
about-
you take away their money, they will reduce it substantially.
What about the Scott Sherman idea of why do these towns have a municipal court if there are only 600 people in this town?
That's what I was wondering. That just seems like a waste of money and resources to have these municipal courts in these tiny little towns.
Right, and the mayor says to the judge, hey, you know what, you better put the screws to these people because we need money for the new aquatic center, or I want a raise, or whatever else. I mean, that's a classic Barney Fife, Mayberry thing going on.
Well, that's a much more wholesale change, and it could well be worthwhile, but that's changing how we do municipal court systems in Missouri.
Right.
And maybe they can make a change only for St. Louis County and say, all right, you're going to go to a countywide ticketing system for all these offenses. That could be done. I think politically it's going to be far harder than saying, all right, we have the Max Creek law in existence. Let's lower the threshold, address it so that it's not only state roads, it's local roads,
Right.
and start enforcing it.
Yeah.
I think there is a law in the books. Let's enforce it better and tighten it up. But I'm not an attorney, as Scott is. I would support some type of wholesale changes to the insane system of the municipal courts in St. Louis County. How we go about doing that in a constitutional way,
Right.
somebody like Scott's going to know better than I.
So in that article, one of the articles I was reading, Forestell Hills just announced that they're starting a police department. And I think the part-timers are making like...
I think it's Floridale Hills.
Floridale Hills. The part-timers are making like $13-14 an hour. A police officer. 13-14. Now, it just struck to me as like, you're going to put a man or a woman in charge of public safety to carry a gun and to, do all these things for $12 an hour? I mean, I would think that they would probably demand more money so that you could get better people, right? Now, I'm not saying if you're making $12, you're not a good police officer. I'm saying you would attract higher quality people if you pay them a better salary than $12 an hour.
That does seem pretty low.
It is low. It's very low comparatively, and that's the issue that many of these small municipalities have.
Right.
The larger municipalities, University City, Florissant, Ferguson,
Right.
pay much better and have on the whole higher quality police officers, and that's not to judge the shooting at all.
Right.
Simply saying that they offer competitive wages and salaries, whereas these tiny ones, Velda Village City, there's 3 dozen others of them. They're really struggling to find officers. But the worst point there is if Floridale Hills is now really going to say we're going to create our own police department, that's going in exactly the wrong direction. There are some cities, Jennings and others, who contract with St. Louis County or
Right.
other larger cities to provide policing. And those are the cities where you don't see this type of abusive speeding tickets. Grantwood Village, Jennings, these are cities that contract with the county, and the county will enforce speeding tickets for public safety, but they won't write tickets to fund your local government. So when Breckenridge Hills contracted with St. Anne, a famous speed trap,
Right.
a few months ago, that was the wrong choice. They didn't pick St. Louis County because they knew they couldn't fund Breckenridge Hills with St. Louis County tickets. They knew that St. Anne would come in and write as many tickets in Breckenridge Hills as they do for St. Anne to fund government, and it does need to be changed.
It's so the system is so broken. I don't know if you were listening Friday, but we had a former alderwoman from St. George call up, and after they disbanded the police force in St. George, the mayor tried to cut a deal with the mayor of Charlock, which is in North County, to send their police officers to South County to St. George to write tickets all day long.
What?
Yeah, think about that for a second. So you'd be living in St. George, which is in South County, and you get a ticket from the Charlotte Police Department that's in North County because they would be contracted to write tickets in St. George.
Well, I'm glad that didn't happen. That's everybody's crazy as it sounded. There are a couple solutions. One, if you're living in one of these cities as a citizen, you can demand that the city contract with St. Louis County, as opposed to run your little 5-person police department that writes tickets all day long.
Right.
All day long. You can also disband, as they did in St. George, attempted to do in Uplands Park, and came again really close in Uplands Park. I'd like to see a lot more of that. Finally, you can contract with other cities. If you're a small town living next to a larger town with a better paid, more professional police department, you can contract with that city. There's lots of options. The worst thing, though, would be to continue the way we're doing it, which is just an abusive ticketing system and has so many problems. And thank you to Radley Balco and others for writing some of these national stories, pointing it out.
Well, Scott Sherman's been on this, and I think
thank you to Scott Sherman for his kit.
Yeah, but Scott Sherman explains it pretty well, and I get this X amount of dollars only to fund the government, and so there's multiple ways to sort of skin a cat. But I think the question we need to ask ourselves as a region collectively is, why do we have towns with 700 people? Why do we have towns with 1,000 people? It just doesn't make any sense. I don't know if they're getting better services in Jennings or in Florestal Hills or Bell Ridge or all these other towns. 600 people, and you have a mayor who's, in cahoots with the police chief, who's in cahoots with the judge, who appoints the judge, who's his buddy, who's the city administrator for 3 or 4 different towns. I can't believe we allow this to happen. So, all right, I'm off my soapbox, and I got something stuck in my throat. David Stokes, when can we read you? When can we see you?
We do have a lot of information on government structure in Missouri, including a recent blog post about cities what % of their budgets in North County come from tickets. You can see that at showmedaily.org, and you can see the government structure work at showmeinstitute.org.
That's David Stokes. David, have yourself a good day.
Thank you, McGraw. Thank you, Kelly.
All right, 8:50. You were better than the Rams yesterday, that's for sure. 8:50. We'll check in with Mike Kelly in a second. Big